queen kneels in the cold dawn. A sword whistles through the air. In one swift stroke, the King of England's wife loses her head. How did it come to this? How did Anne Boleyn, once Henry VIII's beloved queen, end up executed by the very man who moved heaven and earth to marry her? This is the chilling story of the horrible execution of Anne Boleyn, a tale of ambition, betrayal, and a fall from grace that still haunts history. Anne Boleyn's death was more than just a gruesome spectacle. It was a turning point in history. In 1533, Henry VIII had broken from the Catholic Church and upended England's religion just to make Anne his queen. Yet 3 years later, in May 1536, this same queen was arrested, accused of adultery, incest, and treason. It was unprecedented. Never before had an English queen been put on trial for her life. Historians now believe these charges were false, concocted so Henry could be rid of Anne and marry his new flame, Jane Seymour, in hopes of finally siring a male heir. Anne's fall from royal favor to death row shocked the nation and set a dangerous precedent. For modern viewers, her story is a cautionary tale of how absolute power and ambition can turn love into lethal revenge. It reminds us that even the highest in the land can be brought low by politics and intrigue, a theme as relevant now as it was almost 5 centuries ago. In early 1536, Queen Anne Boleyn's world came crashing down. She had given Henry a healthy daughter, Elizabeth, but no sons. After a series of miscarriages, Henry's patience ran dry. By then, he was besotted with one of Anne's own ladies-in-waiting, Jane Seymour, and looking for any excuse to replace Anne. His chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, sensed the king's mood and made a decisive move against the queen. Suddenly, Anne was confronted with shocking accusations: adultery with multiple men, incest with her own brother, and even plotting to murder the king. On May 2, 1536, Anne was arrested and brought by boat to the Tower of London as a prisoner. Not even her frantic protests of innocence could sway Henry now. He wanted her gone. The charges against Anne were almost certainly fabricated, but that didn't matter. A sham trial was arranged to seal her fate. On May 15, 1536, Anne was hauled before a jury of peers in the Tower's Great Hall, in front of as many as 2,000 spectators. The atmosphere was electric with dread. Anne was England's anointed queen. Putting her on trial for treason was unthinkable, like a nightmare come to life. Yet the outcome had been decided before she even set foot in court. Henry himself had chillingly told Jane Seymour that by 3 o'clock she would have news of the condemnation of the putain whore, leaving no doubt that Anne would be found guilty. Despite the hopelessness of it all, Anne defended herself with courage and eloquence. One chronicle recorded that she answered the charges so wisely and discreetly, it was as if she had never been faulty at all. She denied every sordid accusation, admitting only that she'd once given a small gift to a young gentleman. Hardly a crime. But evidence and truth did not matter. The jury, which notably included Anne's own uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, and even her former fiancé, Henry Percy, unanimously declared her guilty of treason. At that moment, gasps rippled through the hall. The Duke of Norfolk could barely speak as he pronounced the sentence. With tears streaming down his cheeks, he condemned his niece to death. Anne was to be burned alive at the stake or beheaded, as the king's pleasure shall be. The shock proved too much for some. Henry Percy collapsed and had to be carried out of the courtroom, and an attendant who had cared for Anne as a child screamed in horror. Anne herself remained eerily composed. Stripped of her crown and titles, she addressed the court one last time. She did not challenge the sentence. How could she when it was futile? But she hinted that the reasons for her downfall were not the ones stated in court. "I have been always faithful to the king," she insisted, "and I only regret that I was not humble enough at times." Those watching knew they were witnessing an extraordinary scene, a queen sentenced to die by her husband's command. Anne was then escorted back to her tower lodgings. An executioner's axe was carried before her, its blade turned outward to signify she was headed to her death. In just a few days, the brilliant and fiery Anne Boleyn had gone from beloved queen to condemned traitor. But Anne's nightmare was only beginning. After the verdict, Anne was imprisoned within the Tower of London to await her end. In a cruel twist of fate, she was held in the very same luxurious royal apartments where she had stayed before her coronation 3 years earlier. Only now the rooms were her cell. Imagine her walking those chambers, recalling how she once prepared to be crowned queen, and now knowing she would leave them only for the executioner's scaffold. Outside, the machinery of death was set in motion. Henry VIII, coldly efficient, orchestrated every detail of Anne's execution. He decided she would be beheaded by a skilled French swordsman rather than a clumsy English axeman, a small gesture of mercy perhaps to ensure the blow was swift. Henry even delayed the execution by a day to make sure the expert swordsman could arrive in time. Some say Henry was toying with the idea of sparing her, or at least deciding whether she could be buried in sacred ground. But if Anne held any hope of a last-minute reprieve, it faded quickly. She knew Henry's mind was set. In the Tower, Anne prepared herself for death with remarkable courage. Her ladies-in-waiting were not her friends. They'd been assigned to report her every word to Cromwell. Yet Anne remained gracious to them. She spent her final days in prayer and reflection. On May 17, 1536, from her window or through whispers, Anne would have learned that her alleged lovers, 5 men, including her own brother George, were executed on Tower Hill that morning. The knowledge must have been devastating. Any slim hope that her family might be spared was gone. Anne was heard to exclaim how, "The time is short," realizing her own death was imminent. On the eve of her execution, Anne made a darkly amusing remark that has echoed through history. As the Tower's constable, Sir William Kingston, kept vigil, Anne mused about the skill of her executioner. With a macabre smile, she wrapped her hands around her slender throat and joked, "I heard say the executioner is very good, and I have a little neck." Then she laughed. The gallows humor sent chills through Kingston. He marveled that he had seen many face death, but this lady has much joy in death, as if she found courage in the darkest hour. Still, Anne confessed to Kingston one worry. She wished the ordeal would be over quickly. Early that morning, she said, "I thought to be dead by this time and past my pain," revealing the terrible strain of waiting. Kingston reassured her the end would be swift and painless. "It is so little," he said of the sword's bite. That night, Anne could not sleep. She took communion at dawn, swearing her innocence one last time before God. Those around her noted that she seemed eerily calm and devout, as if in a state of grace. Kingston wrote to Cromwell that Anne seemed more ready to die than any creature he had ever seen, and that she approached her fate with an almost unnatural composure. Still, she must have been terrified inside. Could Henry truly go through with this? Would he really kill the woman he once loved so dearly? The rising sun on May 19, 1536, would give Anne her answer. Dawn, May 19, 1536. Tower of London. It was a clear Friday morning. Anne Boleyn, dressed carefully in a gown of dark gray damask over a crimson-red petticoat and a mantle of ermine fur, the color stark against her pale skin. Perhaps the red was a deliberate choice, the color of martyrdom, or perhaps it was simply appropriate attire for a queen meeting her end. She made sure her outfit would not impede the swordsman. She even tucked her long dark hair up under a coif so that her neck was exposed and nothing would delay the swordsman when the time came. The hour was at hand. Outside on the Tower Green, a scaffold had been erected near the royal chapel. But unlike other executions in Tudor England, this was no roaring public spectacle. Henry wanted control. Only a small, select crowd was allowed inside the tower walls to witness the death of this former queen. Perhaps a couple hundred people in all. These would have been courtiers, officials, and a few trusted servants. The common mob was kept out. After all, this was the first time in English history that a crowned queen would be executed by her own husband. The gravity of that fact was not lost on anyone. The atmosphere on Tower Green was tense and hushed. No jeering throngs, no cries for blood, only an awful, anticipatory silence and the faint rustle of wind on the grass. At just after 9 o'clock, Anne emerged from the tower and walked toward the scaffold. Those who saw her were struck by her composure. She moved with dignity, holding her head high, described as having a goodly countenance, a noble bearing, despite the fear she must have felt. On the scaffold, Anne Boleyn looked out at the small gathering of faces. Among them were Charles Brandon, the king's brother-in-law, Thomas Cromwell's representatives, the Constable Kingston, and the few ladies who had attended her. Also present was the executioner from Calais, flown in especially for this moment. He was dressed in black, wielding a longsword instead of the traditional axe. One can imagine a slight tremor in Anne's hands as she stepped forward to address the crowd. This was her final moment to speak. Anne's last words were a masterpiece of caution and courage. She had decided, or perhaps was instructed, not to rile the king's wrath further. So she gave a brief, carefully prepared speech. She did not protest her innocence now, nor did she accuse anyone. Instead, she praised Henry VIII, the same man who had condemned her. "I am come hither to die," she said calmly, "and I pray God save the king. For a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never." Those words hung in the air, dripping with irony so thick that some observers must have winced. Henry, gentle and merciful? He had ordered his wife's death on dubious charges. Yet Anne spoke these words with a steady voice. Perhaps she meant them sincerely, or perhaps she knew Elizabeth's safety depended on her showing submission till the end. Any criticism of the king now could be seen as treason from beyond the grave and might imperil her little daughter. Anne also asked the people to pray for her and commended her soul to God, expressing hope that she would be received into His mercy. Her final statement to the witnesses was, "I beseech Jesus Christ to have mercy on me. O Lord, have mercy on me." There was no confession of any wrongdoing, only a brave acceptance of death and a plea for divine mercy. With that, Anne Boleyn knelt upright on the scaffold. Unlike those executed by axe, there was no chopping block for her. She would kneel erect, as was custom for a sword. One of her ladies stepped forward and gently removed Anne's elegant headdress and tied a blindfold over her eyes. The queen's slender neck was now bared for the sword. Anne was heard whispering fragments of a prayer under her breath. "Lord Jesus, receive my soul. To Jesus Christ I commend my soul." The only other sound was the breathing of the onlookers and perhaps Anne's own heartbeat pounding in her ears. The French executioner, an expert at his grim trade, was determined to make the death quick and clean. He approached without Anne sensing it. In a practiced move, he called out loudly to his assistant, asking for his sword. "Bring me the sword." Instinctively, even through her blindfold, Anne turned her head slightly towards the voice. In that split second, the executioner already had the sword in hand. Whoosh! With one swift, merciful stroke, he swung. The sword sliced through Anne's neck and her head separated from her body in an instant. It was so fast that for a moment, as legend has it, her lips continued to move even after her head fell, a ghastly postscript noted by some witnesses. There was no scream, just the gasp of the crowd and the thud of a queen's head hitting the scaffold. Anne Boleyn's execution was over in mere seconds, yet it remains among the most haunting in history. No cheers, no triumphant shouts followed, only a stunned silence. Many present were weeping. Anne's ladies-in-waiting rushed forward, tears streaming, and carefully lifted her head and body, wrapping the remains in white linen. In their grief and panic, they realized no coffin had been provided. This Queen of England, who once sat upon a throne, had no coffin ready for her burial. They had to improvise, using an old arrow chest to hold her remains. With trembling hands, they placed Anne's lifeless body into the makeshift box. covering her severed head next to her. Just steps away stood the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, where many Tower prisoners were interred. That same day, Anne was quietly buried under the chapel floor in the cold ground of the Tower without even a funeral. No bells tolled for the death of a former queen. No official period of mourning was declared. It was as if Henry wanted her memory swept under the nearest rug as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, what was King Henry VIII doing on this grim morning? Not witnessing the execution, he was nowhere to be seen. Some accounts say Henry was out hunting or at his palace awaiting a signal. According to tradition, Tower cannons boomed at the moment Anne was executed, notifying the king that his order had been carried out. Upon hearing that signal, Henry reportedly rejoiced. In fact, that very same day, May 19, 1536, Henry VIII became engaged to Jane Seymour, Anne's lady-in-waiting and the woman for whom he had cast Anne aside. Only 11 days after Anne's death, Henry married Jane and made her his new queen. The ink was barely dry on Anne's death warrant, and Henry was already moving on as if Anne had never existed. Thus ended the life of Anne Boleyn, a queen who died at the whim of a king. Her execution was a horrifying spectacle of injustice, but it was also a pivotal historical moment. In the immediate aftermath, Henry VIII tried to erase Anne from history. He destroyed her badges and portraits, and for the rest of his reign, speaking too fondly of Anne could be dangerous. Yet Anne's legacy could not be so easily buried. Her only child, Elizabeth, would survive the tumult and eventually become Queen Elizabeth I, one of the greatest monarchs in English history. The irony is profound. The woman executed for not bearing a son gave England a daughter who would rule for 45 years in glory. Anne's death, terrible as it was, set the stage for a new era. Even today, Anne Boleyn's story captivates us. It forces us to consider the dark side of absolute power, how a charismatic, intelligent woman was brought down by political intrigue and a husband's paranoia. It's a reminder of how volatile the Tudor court was. One day you're the queen, the most happy, and the next you're a condemned prisoner awaiting the swing of an executioner's sword. Anne's life and death continue to spark debate. Was she an innocent victim of a tyrant's whims, or was she, as her enemies claimed, a schemer who paid the ultimate price? History leans toward her innocence, but the mystery adds to the suspense that draws us to her tale. What is certain is that Anne Boleyn's horrible execution changed the course of England. It warned everyone that no one, not even a queen, was safe from the axe or sword if they crossed Henry VIII. It also eventually led to a lineage that produced Elizabeth I, shaping the future of a nation. Anne's life was short. She was in her mid-30s when she died, but her impact was immense. Her dramatic rise and fall serve as both inspiration and warning, even to us modern viewers, about the dangerous dance of power and ambition. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Anne Boleyn's final chapter. If this suspenseful slice of history kept you on edge, please hit that like button. It really helps us out. Comment below with your thoughts. Was Anne Boleyn a pawn caught in Henry's cruel game? Or did her own actions seal her fate? We'd love to hear what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more fascinating and chilling history stories. We have plenty more tales of intrigue and drama coming up, so subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our next video. Until next time, thanks for watching.